coming to terms with our privilege, whether that's corporate power or financial power or, whatever those forms of privilege are, is really important because it's not about you. You're part of a bigger picture. We actually need you to be fully successful in a very holistic way. And nature is a darn good way to get there for sure.
Welcome to Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, a social worker specializing in human development and fascinated by human potential. For over 20 years, I've been a coach to families with successful businesses and leaders with successful careers. And you may be surprised to learn that true wealth is about coherence. When our inner state of being aligns with how we live, give, lead, and love. In this series, we will explore an integrated model to flourish coherently. Because wealth isn't what we have, it's who we are when we are fully aligned. Well, welcome to this edition of Wealth Coherence. I'm here with Nell 3D. I love that. And Nell is a wonderful colleague and new friend who I'm so grateful to know, who's had remarkable training in terms of using horses in her work in terms of leadership, and has an amazing background. And we are going to dive into a conversation about the powerful relationship that can happen between people and horses when learning about leadership and who we are in the world as leaders and our identity. And in this conversation, there's a lot in terms of when you have family issues in the background or family wealth that's in the background, or maybe you come into a lot of money and there's a lot in terms of identity and leadership in the world that's presumed about you because of your status. And the horses provide such a different orientation towards that. So welcome, Nell. So happy you're here.
Thank you, Emily. So thrilled to be here. I appreciate the invite and that kind intro. Really excited to chat with you.
Oh, yeah. I've been very much looking forward to this, and would love to start off if you could introduce yourself a little bit in terms of your background, how you got involved in leadership, training, and development. You've written a great book and you're writing another one. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about that, and then we'll segue into how you ended up working with horses.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Nell, Derrick-Debavois-Dewy, which just feels like too many syllables to ask anybody to deal with. So when my leadership framework emerged as leading in 3D, which we'll talk more about, but very briefly, the idea is that when we simultaneously pursue goals in 3 dimensions, for me, my own holistic well-being, we, my team, and my family, right, personal and professional team, and then the world around us in some broader way, not, healing cancer or saving the entire rainforest, but just our little bit, we actually perform better, right? And it's not distracting or overwhelming or a millennial trend. This 3-dimensional approach is really aligned to performance. So anyway, that's just by way of saying we lead in 3D. I have actually 3Ds in my name. It's all very coherent. So here we are. And in terms of background, I have to go back briefly, but to when I was 12. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and went to a really fabulously engaged, supported, resourced, diverse elementary school in the public school system of Hartford, Connecticut. And the school that I was to graduate to, the middle school in Hartford, Connecticut, was really not any of those things. This was the early 90s, and so if people watch The Wire in Baltimore, that's what we're talking about, right? Teen pregnancy, at 13, not 18, and gangs and violence and, academics, much less extracurriculars, a total 3rd or 4th or 5th thought. So very luckily for me, my mom was a self-employed massage therapist, so didn't necessarily have a ton of wealth to be working with, but had the wherewithal to know that 400 yards yonder was a leafy green suburb with very well-resourced public schools. And so indeed, she and my stepfather pulled together a mortgage and moved us across the town line.
Oh, wow.
And so I share that story as my entree into leadership because my kind of, precocious 12-year-old self was just like, this is suboptimal. My friends here were smart and goofy and mischievous and great. And so are my friends here, but those guys are not getting nourished in the way that we are, with a ski program and peer mediation and, all the resources that we had, as well as great academics and just basic physical safety. So that was my aha of we need to do better with optimizing talent, was really always how I've seen leadership. That, first school systems, but over my career, over the last 30 years, that has evolved into how can we help leaders optimize people, to create fair, healthy workplaces, because I love to work. I think work is a really important part of our lives if done well, and a source of dignity as well as a creator of impact in the community. So that is why I care so much about leadership and privilege, and whether that's power or financial wealth or the other forms of wealth that we'll talk about. I'm very clear on how much influence that can have and how much suffering it can cause if not engaged and leveraged. So I know we'll get more into all of those things, but that's a little overview.
No, that's great. And how did you channel that into your work with the leadership work that you do? And I know that you've done some international experiences as well, and would love to hear more about that as well. Like, because it's always wonderful to hear like kind of the origin story about what catalyzes us in our purpose in life. And it's so well articulated in terms of how you were so aware, even at that young age, about the privilege and your circumstances and what it afforded you, and how obviously it didn't do that for the young people that had to go to the other school.
Yeah. So, look, at 12 and then at 18 when I went off to college, and then at 21 when I was looking at the big wide world and graduating, I was, making the right choices. And if you wanted to have impact in 2000, you went to nonprofit. And so that's what I did. I had gotten a travel bug, and so I didn't go to fix American public education like I thought at 12, but I did go into education and nonprofit work internationally. And so I spent a decade from Tokyo to Western Europe. I was in Rome for a while managing a network of youth activists appointed by their mayors, which was incredible work. Such smart, ambitious, idealistic, privileged and not, right, in different ways. These activists came from really different perspectives, and helped them to collaborate from Kigali to Paris and Singapore to Lima. It was just this very cool global dynamic. And then basically that decade I was like a mole or something, like burrowing to get closer and closer to the impact. Like, where can I actually change lives? And I was just digging in deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I landed in the West Bank of Palestine, helping to start a community center there for refugee communities, like literally like living in the community center's top floor dormitory. And Emily, it was incredible work. The moms are like, thank you for helping me to structure my micro cooking business, because now I can pay for the electricity bills more regularly. Thank you for the arts programs, because now my 7-year-old isn't threatening to jump off the terrace in a, suicidal spirit. 7-year-old, right? So like impact, check. And two things happened. One, I am not a social worker. I am not fluent in Arabic. I am not a community member there. And so my personal role topped out at a certain point, right? I was really proud of what I was able to do of bringing resource and being a voice for the community to make it really locally driven and all of those things. But then once we had this amazing local team, I was less useful, frankly. And two, I saw that, yes, Ahmed was no longer threatening to jump off the terrace. Like, I am so glad that Ahmed's life improved in that way. And there are a tragic number of places of how many Ahmeds there are out there in our city and in the West Bank and in Palestine and in the Middle East and Africa when you look at the refugee population. And I did not feel satisfied by what I was doing in that kind of supply chain, right? So wrapped up that chapter, went to business school, and in deciding what to do after that, had those lessons, right, in the work perspective of the work involvement that I wanted. And Emily, I had blown up my first marriage and missed my dad's funeral, who died when I was 28, because of my commitment to this international work.
Yeah, it's a cost, right? It's like there can be this strong focus towards our purpose, but we do need to make sure that it's measured and it doesn't cost us the relationships that matter the most to us too. So wow, that's a profound thing to experience, and thank you for sharing about it. And what did it show you? Like, what did you see needed to shift?
in my language now, I understand I was being very 1D. I was very one-dimensional on that world thing, right? Again, burrowing to the impact with no regard for me, right? I was sick all that winter. I was getting frustrated, so there was the me piece. And then there was the we on the personal side that was totally neglected. So again, blowing up that marriage, missing my dad's funeral, which then links back to the me and the wife I want to be and the daughter I want to be and the friend, all of that, right? So those identity pieces weren't being matched. And so that was the beginning of understanding, okay, wait, I gotta walk the talk a little bit more here and weave this together. And back in business school in New York and London, oh my goodness, how much opportunity is there for the private sector in the global economy to really concretely change lives, whether it's employees' lives and making corporate work dignified and healthy, and or the supply chain, right? Making suppliers more responsible and less negatively impactful, making your products more responsible and better for people on the planet, right? So that was really exciting and eye-opening. And then I saw the people running these companies who are brilliant and smart and talented and hardworking and so famished for some sense of impact or connection to something larger. And so I'm like, perfect. We have two huge problems that totally solve each other if we put it together right. And so the company that I ran in New York for 10 years was doing just that, with leadership development for these people, helping them come to terms with the privilege of the power and the corporate influence they held. And then nonprofits thinking about the financial assets that they could leverage by connecting business and impact.
What would you say are some of the most important aspects of leadership that you have seen really makes the biggest difference for people that are so passionate and want to be on purpose when there's always these different pulls in different directions, right? Because that's what coherence is all about. Like, are you living a coherent life internally and externally? Are you matching your values with how you're operating in the world? And so, like, what have you seen are the qualities of leadership that are best to cultivate to support you and having that sense of overall well-being while in that role?
Yeah, I really come back over and over to just the baseline of self-awareness, self-knowledge, which maybe sounds like an obvious starting point, but it's not, right? It's a lifelong journey. We're complex beings, and there's so much layered on from our family experience and from society and from cultural and evolutionary forces, right? And so to get to know that core true self, which also, by the way, is always changing, especially in a fast changing world like today, is really critical lifelong work, particularly for leaders, because the norms of business right now are not very coherent with true personal well-being or societal well-being, right? We have gotten way down one end of the spectrum to being really extractive, short-term minded, one-dimensional, right? There's a sense of like immediate quarterly financial profits without proper regard to not like the nice to do community involvement, support a soccer team, but the core reality of the externalities of our business, right? This isn't like you should be a nicer corporate citizen. This is like your work has costs and benefits, and we need to look at all of them accurately to have a functioning economy, right? And so there is a cost to the carbon you put out in the world. That's not an ideological statement. It's a realistic economic consideration of the larger system. And so without that really deep self-awareness of who am I, who do I want to be, what are those values, how do they line up with the work I'm doing and trickle down to the people I work with and buy from and sell to, it's just really easy to get swept up in the urgent, the panic, the trend, the administration, the conflict, the supply chain chaos, right? And that does not lead to good outcomes in any of these three dimensions, me and my well-being, we and our team, or, that broader world piece. So really, really, really just continuous, persistent self-discovery is so important. And then the courage to change behavior or values, right? There's value and beauty and integrity in consistency. And we have to be willing to change and recognize that ways that we were brought up or trained by our universities, our families, our early bosses maybe weren't spot on, weren't accurate, weren't reflective of how we really want to be, right? And so we have to have the courage to recognize that to ourselves and then publicly. And I think that, both, I believe people are really good, right? So I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning being like, how much carbon can I burn today? And like, how much can I hold people down for their gender identity? Obviously those things happen. And in some cases they're more pathological or sociopathic or psychopathic. But in general, I think when we're connected to our true selves, we do good. We want to leave the world better than we found it. We want to make our grandkids proud. And so when we do this self-awareness, we discover that. And that has good implications for me and world. And it models that to our people, right? Our kids, our next gen, and our employees and our customers. And so it's contagious in a really beautiful way.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to explore this self-awareness piece, and from the standpoint of your stepping into working with horses, because I'm wondering if there's a connection there, or how did that happen? How did you segue into this work in the corporate world and in the nonprofit world to getting trained as an equine-assisted leadership coach and facilitator and bringing that whole aspect to your work?
Yeah. So, again, the universe just guides us when we're coherent and aligned in that way. So it was sort of an accident. I've ridden horses bits and pieces since I was 12, with kind of a 20-year hiatus when I was living in the West Bank or Manhattan. It was not a super accessible hobby. And then it was about 6 or 7 years ago, we started, spending more time out of the city, and I was able to pick it back up. But just as a hobby, I thought, and it was always something that I really valued. My time at the barn as an adolescent girl, I kind of knew in some subconscious way that felt good for me, but I didn't see it or seek it as a self-development tool or a psychological anything. I liked it. And so in 2021, I closed my business. A lot of things had happened. I realized, again, best self was not as a CEO. I don't like managing teams or projects. I love leading and mentoring and ideating, but I had really gotten to the point that wasn't my best role. We had definitely struggled with product market fit. Doing this work of connecting profit and purpose is still pretty forward-leaning and not always clear or financially valued. And COVID hit, so all of our in-person programs really got thrown up in the air, as for so many people. So I closed my company, and I knew I would write the book about that, right? I had this decade of experience with hundreds of brilliant people, plus my own journey. And so that was clearly on the docket. And I think the first hit was a flyer with like little rip-off phone numbers at the bottom at the hardware store for a workshop with horses. And I was like, And so I went, and it was lovely. She did a great job. It was in a beautiful spot. It was a little woo-woo, which I'm totally comfortable with, but is not the work I deliver in the world. I'm spiritual and grounded and connected, but she had more of a woo. And so I didn't really think much about it. And then I don't remember the next door that opened, but I ended up in touch with, I asked for a connection to a woman I had seen on LinkedIn, and the person who was going to connect me, I thought, to her said, call Kelly, who's not the woman I had asked for an intro to. She said, call Kelly Wendorf in Santa Fe. And so I called Kelly. We were on the phone a week or two later. She said, I have one spot a year for an apprentice. Your background sounds like a great match. I'm in if you're in. And I said, I should call you back. Like, I feel like that's something I need to think about. And so I called her back a week later. I said, I can't think of any reason not to do this. It feels like a yes. And she's like, yeah, that's how it works. I can't give you the business plan. We can talk about the analytics or the strategy of this, but the universe tends to just make it happen. And so that was that. And spent 2 years really back and forth to Santa Fe, working with her, working with horses here in the Connecticut area. But the bit that I would say that's so, of course, is that it's nonverbal. And that may not be a surprise to readers who've met horses. They don't talk. So when it comes to the self-awareness, we can do a lot. We do smart leaders at this point in the world, I think, do a fair amount of that, right? You're kind of, I think you're a little behind the times if you're not. but it's intellectual, right? It's a personality assessment, or it's a disc, or it's the written strategy, it's the personal goals, it's your morning stack of habits. It's pretty heady for most people still. Even if it's a mindfulness or meditation practice, it's like how many days and which method for which science do you believe? And so being with the horses forces us to get down into body and heart. And it turns out for smart, relatively evolved people who've done a lot of work already, that tends to be where the unlocks are and where the breakthroughs come from. And so that's why it's so magic.
And I'll say this because you mentioned the woo-woo. So there's different approaches to it, but there is a lot of scientific evidence for what you're describing. And in terms of coherence, which is what this show is about, there's been a lot of ability to measure heart rate variability and coherence with the horses. And they have such huge hearts. And they also have, it's a quite expanded energetic space around them that they're
electromagnetic field from that huge heart.
They can measure it. It goes like 4 feet out. And you can experience that. You'll have a physiological experience in your body when you get present enough to be there with it. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've been on a mastermind call with a group of women that I met with monthly. And one of the call was always really early in the morning for me because I'm on the West Coast. And I was out finishing up some chores on the land. So for those of you who don't know, I live on 10 acres with 10 horses and I'm part of a herd. And so I was finishing up my chores and I was on the call with them and I said, hey, I want to put my video on. I want you to see who's with me. And so I put the video on. It was a Zoom call and showed them 3 horses that were standing next to me. And the entire call's energy shifted in that moment. And somebody said, oh, did you feel that? And everyone was, yeah. And they weren't even physically in the presence of the horses, but yet there was still a resonance that happened by inviting them into the space. So you can think of it as woo-woo, or you can think of it as first of all, there's a lot in terms of quantum physics, and physical space is not necessarily what we think it is. And there are numerous studies, and I'm thinking you're familiar with the Heart Math Institute. They do a lot of work on heart rate variability and coherence and how you can measure it for yourself or anything. And they've done a number of studies with horses as well. So just to bring some scientific grounding to what
1,000%. No, exactly. Which is the approach I take, because I think that's really helpful for my audience. Again, I quite enjoy dipping into the woo-woo and knowing that the science is behind it or not is kind of secondary. But absolutely, in my work, it's very much grounded in that. I mean, exactly, it's just a bigger heart, and so it beats, and there are waves. There's nothing woo-woo about it at all, right? To say nothing of, with all of their senses, we know them to be, they have about a half-mile radius of awareness, and again, all of that, another version of another line of science, is just evolution. They're prey animals, right? So it's easy to think of these huge creatures with hard hooves that can kick you, but they're prey. They have come up through 56 million years as one of the most successful mammals in 3.8 billion years of evolution, right? Incredible success rate because of how they've learned to be in a herd, right? And highly, highly sensitive, not just to presence, but in a really nuanced way. And so to the coherence point, I know we talked about this a little bit in our conversations before. One of the 3 kind of skills that I really highlight from the horses for leaders is congruence. So a version of coherence, certainly, right? And the idea there that I think brings it home is mountain lions are our number 1 predator for horses, and so by definition they live in the same ecosystem, right? It doesn't work for them to be a prey predator pair if they're not in the same places. But if they're around and horses are panicked just because they're around all the time, that doesn't work, right? Horses can't be panicked all the time. And so what they've evolved to learn is when a mountain lion is just being and they can just coexist, and that's fine, versus when a mountain lion is pretending not to be in the space, because now that's when they're hunting and they are a risk, right? And so horses have this sniffer, multisensorial sniffer for incongruence or incoherence of, I'm here, says the mountain lion, but I'm pretending not to be so that I can attack and come home with dinner. right?
Yeah.
So again, not because they're like fabulous leaders or a gimmick that they're trying to train us to be better, but because that's how they survive. They have a real uh, sensor for incoherence, incongruence.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And it's fascinating to see what happens for people when they come to retreats. And I'd love to hear some stories that you've had. I remember one retreat where somebody was adamant about being terrified of horses.
Mm,
And yet when she was amongst the horses and choosing to be with them, like it was amazing how many horses went right up to her. And it was like, is there a story you have about being afraid of horses? Because
right,
in this moment, they're not getting that message because they
right.
wouldn't go anywhere near you if they thought you were actually afraid of them. Like, what what are you actually feeling right now? Where are you feeling it in your body? Where and having the person get so present with themselves that they're actually recognizing that there's this part of them that's overjoyed to be near the horses and so curious about them
Yeah,
and it's like a whole other way of being, and it's like this story that we have can so often run us, but it doesn't have much accuracy anymore, and how to be able to shift that. And they provide such great metaphors in terms of how we approach life in that way too.
yeah. And I mean, I think, in that person's example, you were there, so you'll know more exactly what happened. But, I think a version of it is this coherence where if she had said, yep, I love horses, I'm fine. No, yep, no problem, great, and marched in, fear flooded and heart
Mm-hmm.
beating, they would not have
that wouldn't
approached her.
that would not
That
have
would
worked.
not have worked,
Right, so
right?
being able to
But they're
speak what
okay
was
with
her
fear.
story. Yeah.
They don't mind.
Yeah,
They wanted to say, hey,
it's
we're good.
okay,
Don't be
trust
scared. We got you, right? And she had some other portion that was willing to overcome the fear, right? Or courage in
yeah,
her, or knowing that that was going to be good medicine. So that's how because that
yeah.
happens all the time, that people
Mm-hmm.
come and don't have experience with horses or any animals at all and are a
Mm-hmm.
little bit intimidated. I'm like, that's just great. Own it and be with it, and they'll manage you. Don't worry. When people say like they can smell the fear on them, like, no, they can pretend you're false bravado trying to pretend you're not. That's
Yeah.
what they don't like.
That is so true. You've been doing retreats in a number of different settings, right? You
Yeah.
do international travel to retreat places. You would go to high-end, beautiful lodges, and then you have it right at your stable where you're local. It'd be great to hear what you've seen happen for some participants that you facilitated that experience with the horses, and what have you seen has made a difference for them?
I'm just back from Montana, where I did a group last week or 2 weeks ago now. And one of the women who did it was in our debrief after. She said, I'm not like a Zen chick. That's not my, but I feel like I just had like an hour massage. Like, she said, the relax and the grounding that comes from an hour at the spa, I feel that in my body and in my head. I'm so grounded. I'm so settled. She's pregnant with a baby after a few difficult losses and challenges. And so there's a lot, and in a busy job and coming off tourist season at a very fancy property, there's a lot. And she was just like, wow. Because in our core experience, we're really only in the arena for 20 or 30 minutes as part of the bigger experience. She's like, that 20 minutes with these guys was transformational. So there's all kinds of nuance and stuff more specifically that happens. But I think just the potency of that reboot is amazing, really good bang for buck. And that is the necessary precursor to the work that can happen, right? But so imagine if you went into a massage before every coaching session, how much more present with the challenge you'd be able to be. So I thought that was a beautiful one.
That's great. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
It'd be great to hear that somebody who, like, in terms of leadership in particular,
Yeah.
where the work you did with the horses really supported them in their goals around their leadership.
Yeah. So a favorite one is here right near home in the New York area. I was at first just working in a backyard barn. A friend has a horse at home and a little mini horse and 2 mini donkeys. And I was early in my apprenticeship. And so I had a friend of a friend come out who was a very, very intense, high charging, purposeful leader. She worked for Etsy in their early days, and that dynamic of conscious business, and then Richard Branson and his high-flying philanthropy, and was stepping into a new C-suite role. And she said, look, I am a workaholic. I know. I love my work. It has a lot of impact. I was like, I see you. I was that for a decade. I burnt myself out that way too. But she said, I'm stepping into this C-suite role, and I've worked for a C-suite leader who was also a workaholic, and that is my story. And here I am now. I don't want to do that. I don't want that to be my story for my team. And so I was like, great, let's see what the horses have to say. At the very least, you get a day in the country out of Manhattan. So we're in the session. She's now out in the arena, and I see Teddy, the bigger horse, who's not always super forthcoming. He does his thing as the kind of alpha in that group. But he very clearly led her into, we're in this big, beautiful pasture in Greenwich, Connecticut, and it's fall, and it's scenic, and the leaves. And then there's a lean-to, a little coverage for them in the case of rain or something. So he leads her in there. I'm like, it's weird. It's a beautiful day. I don't know what they're doing. And they're in there for a bit, and they finish up, and then they come over to debrief. And I'm like, what was going on? What were you doing in the shed? She said, he led me in there. I followed, and he started pawing and kicking up the dust that's in there, to the point that I had kind of a coughing attack. It was really uncomfortable. There's dust in my eyes. I'm coughing. And I was, what's going on? And pretty quickly it dropped that is what I do. That's my overwork. I kick up dust. It's not necessary. It's not directly related to mission. I'm just kicking up dust, and it literally is making people cough and cry, and it's miserable.
Fantastic. Oh,
right? So occasionally you have these like on the nose. Stop kicking up dust.
That's great.
And so again, she knew this. She knew that she was an overworker. She's a very smart person. She could take an hour limit or a project limit or an email. Like, she could make an intellectual fix for this. But she hadn't. But now all of a sudden she has this visceral sense of dust in her eyes. And every few months as she started the next job, she would text me and be like, I was Teddy. I found myself, I was setting a daily morning meeting, I was kicking up dust, and I stopped myself. So really,
that's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, you're making me think about a woman is a co-founder and leader of a really phenomenal family office company that supports family offices and has a tremendous amount of responsibilities. And she came out for a retreat with the horses, and the way our property is set up is the horses roam free, and we can do things in the arena to have a specific thing with obstacles and stuff, and we can do the round pen. But I always love to just take people up to the top of the hill and just be with the horses while they're just in nature. And they can choose to be as close or as far away as they want, and I just am with them, and they choose to chat with me or not. It's completely up to them. And we'd gone up to where some horses were grazing, and we were just standing, the two of us together, and she started to tell me about how she's perceived in her role and some challenges she had as a leader in the company. And she just started reflecting, and the miniature pony came over and just stood right next to her and kind of put his muzzle on, like his little nose on her hand. And we just noticed that. And then another horse came over and was just kind of being there with her, and she was sharing things. And then she said, and the hardest thing for me is how people tell me that they're really intimidated by me. And the moment that those words came out of her mouth, another horse, our oldest horse here, came over and put his head over her shoulder, like right here. And I just started laughing. And I was like, okay, we just have to look at what's happening here. And I need to let you know, this guy who just showed up, he's the most intimidated horse in the herd. He's a bit overly concerned about where everybody is, and they can push him around a little bit. And he came right up to you and you said that. I'm wondering what you might notice with this. So I like just giving them like the observations about what's happening, and then they can come up with their stories themselves. And it was a really liberating thing for her in terms of her own orientation, and recognizing how much softer she's become and how she isn't that intimidating person anymore. And she was able to let go of that story, leave it with the horses. So it's really amazing what they bring. It's
amazing what they bring, and it's so important to have the facilitation, I think, because they're subtle animals, right? But because of their evolution, that one of the second principle that I share is about conservation of energy. Again, evolutionarily, they do not do a thing without reason, right? Whether it's self-protection or this herd mentality of being with us as members of the herd. And so when they walk over, there's no accident. Something is happening. They've heard or felt something. So I think that piece is so important to tell people, and to make that part of the experience, because we do not live in a culture of subtle communication, right?
Well, we miss a lot. We miss a lot of subtle communication for sure.
Well, right, because we're used to it being in all caps and at this volume and 30 times a day, you know? And so I think both explaining that and having people experience what it can be like to have to do the least and see if your message gets across. And you might need to step up a notch, right? But pretty quickly people come down to that level. And the other piece, I think, of this magic is, again, hearing in a purer way, right, from these nonverbal beings who don't have any politics or agenda, and there's no transaction happening between us. And so they can express something like that of, you're not intimidating. And that may not mean that people aren't reacting to her as though they are intimidated, but that's not a her issue, right? As an empathetic leader, she's going to want to find ways to do that. But it's not that she is doing something in some way to make it so, right? And so I think that purity of input is something that I see too in sessions all the time. It's just really a gift for people.
Yeah, that's so well said. And when you think about like this experience that this high-powered leader came and had with you and the horses and got this amazing insight, what is it that you think is drawing people that are in leadership roles now to want to do something like this with horses? Because there can be that woo-woo factor that people dismiss, or there can be that, well, no, I'm too busy. Like, what do you see is making it so people are, seeing that this isn't just a fun, like, a side thing, but this is a really important thing to do.
Yeah. Generally folks who are coming, a few things, right? They're strivers. They want to be better. They want to have more impact. They want to be healthier. They want to be happier. They want to be better parents and bosses and leave a legacy, right? They are curious and hungry in that way. Number one. And so they've done a lot of work, right? They didn't just wake up to Google personal development, and this is the first thing they came across, and they're all in, right? They've had the coach, they've done the retreat, they've had, again, meditation or therapy or whatever cocktail they've experienced of work over the years. They are certainly not horse people necessarily. I mean, occasionally there will be a horse person who's like, oh, this sounds like a fun way to do it, but that is not the prereq. And obviously we're not riding or, there's no experience required. You just have to come wear closed-toed shoes and be a human in the arena. It's not technical. And then I think there's often a subconscious or sometimes very explicit valuing of this ancient natural wisdom, right? A sense that maybe if we look at all of evolution as a year and humans showed up at 11:59 and 19 seconds right before the end of the year, that something that happened even just on December 30th of that year might be worth listening to, because it represents about 5,000x our number of times around the sun. And so why wouldn't I tap into that, right? I think there's more and more of that these days. And it may show up just as oh, I love being in nature, right? But there's a deeper subconscious knowing that it's not just about getting out of the smog for a day. It's very profoundly not only healing, but really educational and transformational.
Yeah, I've seen that for sure. And I think it's interesting because when people find out about the fact that I've chose to leave La Jolla, gorgeous, amazing place to live, walk to the ocean every day, to be on 10 acres in Northern California with 10 horses, there's this look that they give me, this knowing understanding. And I often will get this sigh from people in terms of, you could, and it's there's a real value to this that they innately know.
Yeah.
And then of course the next thing is, but how is it to be so remote? And I said, well, I'm 15 minutes from the highway and it's not remote at all, but it is delightful to have that space and that nature and access to nature. And I'm recognizing how rare that is for people, even when they have a lot of quote unquote wealth, right?
Yeah.
And there's something that is provided to us through nature that is priceless and that people really do value. And when the horses are involved, it just takes it to a whole other level, right?
So another leader was with me in Italy at the property that I work with there, which is, I mean, I'm biased. I have Italian citizenship. My first husband was Italian. I lived in Rome for 5 years. So Italy is my, for sure, like soul happy place. But I think a lot of us feel that way between the cypress trees and the wine and the pasta and the castles. Like it's not a hard place to be happy. And this property is, just next level stunning. And so, she's extremely busy. She runs a tech company. They do accounting and kind of growth analytics for small businesses globally. So she has a team of 90 people in, I think, nearly as many countries, maybe 40 countries or something, and 5,000 clients around the world. Small businesses run by, and that means everything from like $80 of baskets in Kenya a year to $8 million of publishing, but by an independent publisher in New York, right? So she has a real array. And she had just gotten a diagnosis of cervical cancer. And so she was headed into a hysterectomy. And this trip fell in between. She is a striver, as I said. And she's like, well, I'm not coming to Italy. Like, we're going to go and then I'll come home and have surgery. It'll be great. So she's in a group in the arena, and we were working with 3 horses, kind of a lead mare, and then 2, actually one of that mare's daughter, and then another horse, because the resort, part of what they're known for is this herd that they have bred from scratch themselves and trained. And so the daughter is, younger and very spirited. They have great lives and great interactions with humans. So they're very engaged and high energy. And she's all about Carissa. She's wanting to kind of meet her and figure her out. And the lead mare, who, listeners may or may not know, the lead mare tends to be the one who's doing the least. She's standing in the back. She's the quietest. She's watching more carefully than anyone else, but doing very little and often doesn't engage directly. She, several times over the 30 minutes, herded her daughter and the other horse away from my friend and created like this physical barrier and, really protected her physical space. And so this CEO dealing with cancer, dealing with a global team, dealing with an insane global market, this is a year or so ago, so we were already in the chaos, just was brought to tears. Because again, she had been told by coaches and colleagues and her executive team and her advisors, number 1, you've been running this company for 19 years from zero. Number 2, the chaos is real. Number 3, you're healing. You need to fight this cancer and heal your body. So you do not need to be in every meeting. You do not need to have 13 direct reports because of the way our executive team has shaken out. Like, you need to be buffered and we can handle it. But she couldn't hear that, right? She grew up as a youth pastor. She is impact to the nth degree in the business world, but like there is justice in this for her. She, and so for the horses, again, that pure communication where it's not her mom, it's not her investors, it's not the executive team, nobody has an agenda, but the horse is protecting her from the younger staff, from the noise, from the chaos, landed, and she was able to realize like, okay, it's actually like in the natural order of things for me to be less accessible right now.
Yeah. Wow. That's so profound. And what a gift for her. Oh my gosh. The fact that she said yes to going and then getting that information, right?
Exactly.
I love this work. It's so funny because people will say, well, what exactly happens and what's the agenda? And it's always like, you got to trust the process, and the horses lead the way and nature shows up as it will. I mean, I had an owl show up in one of the sessions. I had a swarm of dragonflies show up. It's like, so this doesn't happen every day, just so you know. And just allowing for that mystery and allowing for whatever's going to unfold for you, and then just trusting in that it's going to be perfect however it shows up.
And listening to it. Yes, right. I mean, I've had wind play and you're like, it wasn't a windy day. Like this isn't a windy spot. So that gust, you got to listen. Right. Yep. And like, it's data. It's just data. the hawk, the eagle, the dragonfly, all of these things are part of the story, right? I know you work with some people who do constellation therapy and family constellation work, which I'm not deeply trained in by any means, but I know enough to know that then as you're watching the herd, that's also no accident, right? And so with this last group in Montana, we start and they're all, protective, butts together, heads out, checking us out, like, what are these humans doing in our paddock, like, what's happening? We're gonna circle up, and again 30 minutes later the one woman feels like she's had a massage and the horses are scattered, head out, totally unprotected, totally safe, and the stable hand who's helping me manage the session is like, these guys are not chill. This is a tourism ranch. We have kids, we have riders, we have corporate groups, we have buckaroos who aren't buckaroo, they are. And so for them to have quieted in that way and feel so safe in 30 minutes speaks to the work and your energy that this session is bringing. So no, definitely. It's very 360 and again, subtle but not, right? You're like, okay, this swarm of dragonflies is like not an accident.
And it's really fun, like the creative ideas that show up too. Like when you talked about families, I love doing this work with families. I work with a lot of step family, blended family situations, and it's like they get to look at how they are as a herd and the ways that they get to notice their stories. Like we have a miniature pony, and one person will observe that pony's behavior and think, oh, wow, they're really nervous and anxious. And the other one's like, wow, they're really feisty and engaged. And it's like, same pony, same behaviors, two different interpretations. What does that mean for you all? And how does that play out? Or it's just amazing what the horses can bring. I also found that like we've done some mother-daughter retreats that have been really transformative for them in terms of the mother seeing the daughter in her own right and her own identity separate from her, and then the daughter being able to show some leadership and some wisdom that the mother gets to benefit from as well. It's a really wonderful opportunity to see each other and experience each other newly. Couples benefit from it as well. I see it that way too. Little tidbit, I had a group come out. I had a woman who was signed up to come out with me, and she texted that week and said, hey, my husband actually would love to come watch if, it turns out he's free. And I was like, we don't do observers, that's not a thing, but I'm happy to do a joint session for you both. He's a tech leader. And she's like, okay, great. So, he does the forum, is the intake that I do with people. And turns out he's just laid off 70 people at his startup. And so he's going through a bunch of that. And so great, let's talk about it, So I picked them up at the train. We're here in Greenwich, so it's great for people. They take the train out from Manhattan. I get them, and we sort of slowly downgrade into like country life. And as we're chatting in the thing, I'm like, so, you'll each have some time. And if you want to be then in the herd together, you can do that too. And they're like, yeah, actually, we're at this really interesting moment in our relationship, approaching 40 and deciding if we want to have kids or not. And I'm like, oh my God, this is way above my pay grade. Like, I can do CEOs and leadership teams, but like, I am not a couples therapist. So I'm like, I mean, great. We'll see what the horses have to say. So Emily, we do their pieces, great. And then I'm like, great, do you guys want to go hang out? And so they go out there, not holding hands, but definitely like together as a unit. And Teddy, the big horse who I mentioned before, and his little mini horse Brownie, Teddy comes right up, which, as I said, he doesn't always as the alpha, but he zooms right in with them, and Brownie alongside, which is not so unusual. They're best buddies. Brownie's a mini horse. And they're kind of sitting there and, petting and enjoying, engaging. And then Teddy walks away and Brownie just stays with them, the baby. I'm like, well, scene. I think you've got your answer. Yeah. It was unbelievable. They just giggled. They're like, we think it's something we really should explore. We like the idea. We felt great having somebody to take care of, that Teddy trusted us with his baby. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's amazing.
I love it. Yeah, it's such a mystery and it's so much fun, and it is transformative. It's like people get such insights and wisdom. Do you do anything in particular at your retreats to support people on how to take it back into their lives?
For sure, right? Because therein lies the magic, or not. I mean, I think already by being visceral, again, the dust in Katie's eyes, the baby horse right here, the herd, the alpha mare herding, that just is a different thing than a learning or a plan that we write down. So, we have that helps. The horses do their part. But there's all kinds of, even in just the 2-hour session, there's all kind of ritual built through of, an artifact for them to take back, a postcard that shows up at some point 3 to 12 months down the road, written by them in the session, right? So there's that kind of very visceral reminder. I don't do much one-on-one coaching, and I always do a follow-up to this about 10 days after, just to, cement it back in their day-to-day lives. And then especially if you're working with a team, that can really carry out, because you have all these insights and ahas in the arena, and then you get on the plane, and then you get back to the work, and then you're in the conference room, and that space and that mode and that pressure. And so those are great, then you do bring it verbal, right? And kind of have those conversations with me, with their notes from the session, and all of that. So, and then, the other activities at the retreat are all around mostly really just quieting the nervous system so that you can hear it, number one, but so that it can really land, at least in those few days, to give you the best chance of success going forward.
That's wonderful. I'll add to that. We give personalized journals that they can decorate while they're there, capture different things, and then invite them to keep using it and keep it alive for themselves. And then we do some creative arts, some different things that they can do.
Fun.
And then we have somebody here who's very involved in the ranch and boards a horse here, and she's a creative artist, and she's created all these really fun, unique, one-of-a-kind magnets. And they're all over the shed doors for the tack rooms. And so that's where we meet and everything. So they're around these beautiful, brightly colored magnets in shapes of hearts and horses and at the end, everybody's invited to take one home. And so it's like a visual representation that's there too, which we just think
really sweet.
Meaningful for them. So yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, well, this has been fantastic. I'd love to know if you have any closing thoughts that you think listeners would really benefit from in terms of understanding this connection between nature and horses and leadership, because you're so passionate about it and you're doing such great work around it.
I think it's a general call to the work I do in this idea of leading in 3D, and nature and the horses is an amazing way to get there, but just really a strong and loud call to say that your success in a 3D way, so money, health, happiness, joy, impact, lead, all of that, your success is not just a you game. Like, we need you to be successful right now, right? Like it's not like, self-indulgent or egotistical or whatever to be this striver and to be always learning and doing more. It is absolutely a world citizen obligation, and I think especially when people's power or influence comes from wealth that may or may not have been of their own hands or life cycle, that can feel difficult to embrace, right? But I talk like coming to terms with our privilege, whether that's corporate power or financial power or, whatever those forms of privilege are, is really important because it's not about you. You're part of a bigger picture. And so, I think women particularly, or again, wealth holders can kind of shun or feel shame or guilt or just want to kind of throw it away or not look at it. And that's really not of service. We all have a certain position that we are born into by whatever accident of birth, not our choice, not our earning, not, but it is where it is. And so in a poly crisis like we're living right now of health and economics and, political unrest and violence, and it's not the most responsible thing to just walk away from that. We actually need you to be fully successful in a very holistic way. And nature is a darn good way to get there for sure. But whatever your path is, I'm just feeling really motivated to like engage and call people to that, because the ones who tend to be the most reluctant often are the ones who have the best intent and the most power to change the world for better. And so, all hands on deck.
Well, thank you for that. Hopefully the people who heard that are inspired to really take a good look at where they're being intentional and where they're being congruent with who they are, their values, what they care about, and how they're operating in the world. Because so often we can get caught in this kind of pendulum swing of what we're supposed to look like or how it's supposed to be, or we have that reactivity in terms of I don't want to have anything to do with that on the other side, when the reality is we each have a purpose and a place to play in terms of what we have been given in life, and
Yeah.
it's those choices that make all the difference, and there's different ways to access that. And as we've explored, there's this kind of mysterious intuitive knowingness that happens when you're in nature and with horses, and allow that presence to have show up for you what's there for you to see and know differently or newly, or maybe remembering about who you are.
That.
So thank you for that. And
Yeah.
I do want to say we're going to give links to all different ways that people can connect with you. Love that
Great.
you're writing a new book, and that people are going to get a chance to learn more about that. And then because you mentioned Kelly, I just want to give a nod that Kelly Wendorf is a real leader in this field of
Absolutely.
the wisdom of horses and bringing it to the world. She's written an amazing book, which is Flying Lead Change, and she runs a program called Equus, and it's she has a partnership with the Modern Elder Academy in the Santa Fe campus, and so I'm going to actually be interviewing Kelly at another time on this, because this is
So
our
glad.
special series on wealth coherence and how horses can support us in our identity and our leadership and having truly coherent lives. So thank you, Nell 3D. So
Thank
happy
you,
you're
Emily.
here.
It was a treat. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wealth Coherence. If it resonated, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review. This will help others find their way to this space. And if you're ready to keep exploring what it means to live, lead, and give from a place of coherence, head to emilybouchard.com to stay connected. Until next time, be well internally and allow your external life to be the fullest expression of who you truly are.